Oasis. Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.
Hello, I am Scott Allen, and thanks to my daughter Kate for developing the intro to the Practical Wisdom for Leaders podcast, where we offer a smart, fast-paced discussion on all things leadership. My guests help us explore timely topics and incorporate practical tips to help you make a difference in how you lead and live. If you haven't done so, please click subscribe so you automatically, seamlessly stay in the know when we publish new episodes. Likewise, please provide me with feedback. What do you like? What do you dislike? And what else would you like to know? And now, today's show. Okay, welcome everybody. Today on the program, we have two special guests. These are coaches, leadership coaches, not the leadership coaching you're thinking about, but these are coaches for the Collegiate Leadership Competition. They've been involved in this organization for probably about 4 years. And to remind some of our listeners or share with some of our listeners, really the Collegiate Leadership Competition is trying to create a practice field for leader development. There's a lot of sitting in a room talking about leadership. There's a lot of people out in the world doing leadership. How do we create a middle ground where people can learn and get some coaching in the process? So today we have Meghan Pickett. She is a Ph.D. candidate in IO psychology. She is at Illinois Tech. And she is the Leadership Academy Program Manager in Illinois Tech's Center for Leadership Studies. So Meghan, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Scott. I'm excited for this conversation.
Yes. And then we also have Bruce DeRuntz. And Bruce is at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, Illinois. He is the Leadership Development Program Director, and he's a professor in the Department of Technology at SIU. Bruce, did I get that correct?
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about each one of you. Maybe, Meghan, we can start with you a little bit, maybe fill in some of the gaps, and then Bruce, we'll go to you, and then we'll jump into our chat.
Sure. So I got my BA from North Central College, which is a liberal arts school in Naperville, and then moved to Illinois Tech for my master's and now my PhD, like you said. And a lot of my research has focused on cross-cultural stress perceptions and work-family conflict, particularly with immigrants. But I've moved in recent years to leadership research and leadership development. As you mentioned, I also work as the program manager for the Academy, and I also do some consulting on the side for a fantastic company called Happy Spectacular. But beyond that, I spend a lot of my free time reading, especially now. Previously, I used to enjoy traveling as well, but that's on halt for the foreseeable future.
Tell us really quickly about Happy Spectacular. That's a cool name.
Yeah, so the longer name is Happy Work, Spectacular Life, and they're really sort of trying to change the philosophy of work and trying to make sure that this place that you spend most of your time, which is work, isn't the place you dread going to on Mondays and is instead something you find fulfilling. So I've done a lot of statistical work for them, some 360 analysis with some leaders, focusing in that area, helping people reorient and create the work life that they want.
Wonderful. And Bruce, you are an engineer.
Yeah.
And you're teaching leadership. I love it.
Well, one of the best parts of life is when serendipity strikes. And I've been an engineering professor since, I guess, about 1998. And after going through and getting, advancing through the ranks to full, I had gotten this opportunity. My dean came to me and said, one of our largest alums is wanting to invest in the college. He doesn't want to give any money. He wants to invest in what he's saying is the most valuable need out there in the workforce today, and that is leadership, future technical leaders.
The fact that the two of you have jumped in and really decided to be a part of this experiment, and really in some ways that's kind of what it is we're learning. We're learning quickly and we're learning rapidly. And especially in this last year, we've had to take what was something that was a live experience, obviously, with 300 people in a room, so to speak, and move that online. So I'd love to have kind of two conversations. One is, and this is where we'll start, in this whole activity of coaching leaders, And again, we're not using coaching in the sense of executive coaching. We're using coaching as in soccer or football or chess or some other activity where we're actively coaching leaders and students in this case to build skills around problem solving, have difficult conversations, enact a certain leadership style because that's what's appropriate for this context in this moment, and coaching towards that. So Meghan, maybe we start with you. What's maybe one or two observations you've had about that work? Because it's different. It's not most leadership development is people sitting in a room talking one way. Maybe we do a little activity, we debrief it, and then we're done. But if that was football, you would not have a football player at the end of that. You'd have someone who knows about football.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think one of my biggest observations with coaching recently has been really that it's all about creating the space. Especially for us, we spent years learning and either in the classroom or through practical experience, as Bruce was mentioning, like what leadership should look like. And I think the default setting would be to kind of lecture in that space, especially when we're virtual like this, to just sit down and tell people what to do. But effective coaching for me has been all about kind of creating, to use some of your words, creating the playing field, creating the space for people to explore, to practice, and most importantly, to fail. So one of the things that I do with the CLC curriculum is I actually create an activity at the very beginning that forces my students to fail. We call it the impossible activity. And essentially, it comes down to no matter what route they take from this escape room, basically, they will fail. And I do that so that we can have the first conversation about how do you respond when you are faced with failure, because it's going to happen. And sometimes that failure comes down to the person who's subjectively deciding if you succeed or not. And other times it comes down to, your competence or experience in an area. I think that we can still do it virtually, and I think that's essential. And then the other one, which fits beautifully with your curriculum, is really that coaching comes down to experiential learning. So I think that the leadership industry is something like $40 billion US annually. Most of that money goes towards like really structured one-time event. Coaching and development has to be sustained. It has to be long-term. So yes, we have this one semester, but I really like students to come back for a couple of years or to continue the development. And I use some of your curriculum terms even outside of CLC to reinforce that, because if you're going to grow, if you're going to learn, it has to be intentional and it has to be sustained. So trying to find ways for them to weave it in to their life outside of the curriculum is essential. And we spend a lot of our time together debriefing. How can you connect this? How are you going to use this? And I think that's probably the crux of the way that I approach coaching.
I love it. And I liked how you started. I want to get that activity. In Star Trek, there's a scene, the Kobayashi Maru, right? Where
this is what inspired it. This is it.
We're kind of geeking out a little bit because we all know what that is. But I love it because I think you're exactly right. There's a quote, I'm not going to get it perfectly, but it's John Wooden. And it says something to the effect of, look, a doer makes mistakes. And if you're a doer, you're going to make mistakes. And failure is inherent, whether it's in engineering, whether it's in science, in any of these domains, it's baked in as we learn. And so I love that. And I also love the whole notion, because it kind of made me start to think about Erickson, K. Anders Erickson, and his work around expertise, because a major gap we have in this leadership education space is that we don't always necessarily have mental representations or models of what good, quote unquote, looks like, of what we're shooting for. So it's kind of interesting because we're exploring that space.
Yeah, and one of the things that when I talk about intentionality and practice, we usually talk about, practice until something becomes procedural. That's expertise, right? You do it so many times, you don't have to think about it. And in so many ways, that is essential. It's important. But I think it only works when it is paired with that intention, because otherwise, something procedural allows for complacency. So are you taking the time and doing, to use like an Army term, an after action review? Are you sitting down and looking at, okay, what could I have done better? How could I have improved? And if you allow that debrief element to be pushed to the side and to think, okay, I've reached leadership, whatever that is, I've reached this title, X person has told me I am a leader, therefore I can stop practicing. At that point, I think you've given up. Leadership is a lifelong learning experience, and if you ever forget that, you've cut yourself off at the foot.
Yeah. Well, and both of you stem from, and I've interacted with a number of leadership educators from across North America primarily, especially on collegiate campuses. And both of the programs that you are a part of are just incredible programs. They are. And Bruce, I know that, again, you have 10 major sponsors of this work. There's a whole apparatus and kind of infrastructure built around what's been built at SIU. Talk a little bit about how the coaching of leadership, what are some of the observations you've had in exploring with that space?
We failed badly the first, Scott, if we had another hour, I'd ask you about your failures in getting the CLC launched, right? There had to be some that you say, whoa, let's take 10 steps back, because that sure isn't working. And that's where we were in our first few years also. I haven't had formal IO training or OD training either, but I learned leadership through a lot of failures. But fortunately, I had some good mentors along the way who are outside the university, who are people from industry and military, seeing things such as the AARs. The military is the world's greatest training organization there ever was and ever will be. It's literally life and death. But we took a lot of those same models and we applied them to the LDP and started getting more comfortable in failing and teaching them that it's okay to fail, and actually it's the most valuable thing you do because you learn what you do. And for myself personally, I had to be all in. It's nearly impossible to be this person who's the do as I say, not as I do. Whether you like it or not, young, old, tenured, untenured, whatever, you have got to be in there shoulder to shoulder with these students, modeling the way if you're going to expect to get the results. I love what Meghan said about creating the space. Similarly, we created a culture, right? A culture of accountability. They hold me accountable, I hold them accountable, and it's all based upon safety and mutual respect for one another. And they know that whatever they do to hold people accountable is going to make the program better and stronger. And we have just continued to build on top of students from the past and their contributions. I'd like to introduce another term that we have used to create, I think, a very strong program, and that is social interdependency, right? These students, none of them want to do what we ask them to do independently. They don't. You and I wouldn't do it. Look how many New Year's resolutions are failed. But when you show up as a group and everybody else is going to be there at 5:30 a.m., and they're going to say, where's Scott at? Scott's going to show up because he knows there's 15 people looking for him. And so suddenly Scott says, well, this is really hard. It's unusual. But after week 4, it's not so bad. It's getting better. I see. Everybody else is excited about this. And before you know, you move the whole organization together. And you start loving it. And you start seeing the results that it's making in your own personal life. And then the experiential side, we ask them to apply to projects, service learning, service leadership, which is nice and good. And it's a soft, easy place to fail. But then I ask them to apply it to their registered student organizations, the robotics team, the greenhouse green roof sustainability team. And these are things that they're really passionate about. And where other teams have failed because they don't have any leadership training or they haven't applied it, we have gone through the experiences like CLC, and they take it with them, and they're using the SOLVE model on day one. Our team was high-fiving each other last week, Scott, when you gave us a social impact challenge and said, do this in a half hour. I want 5 SMART goals in a half. Everybody's like, what? Are you kidding me? That normally takes a semester. right? Megan, do you have the same experience?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, and they love the fact that at the end of 30 minutes, like, by golly, we did it. We all have 5 SMART goals. We are off to a faster start than ever before. It gives them that sense of self-confidence and self-esteem that they are really, truly learning something they're going to apply to their life. And we have the good fortune of being in the program or having the program around long enough, 2 major NSF awards. And we've shown that early leadership training, such as what we give, results in a 30% higher and faster time to graduation.
Interesting.
So leadership works.
I think especially, oh, sorry, Scott.
No, go for it. No, go for it, Megan, please.
The beautiful thing, too, about the leadership programs that you and I are both running is that it is early intervention because, Scott, we were talking about this a little bit offline. There is a humility in college students and young people who are still willing to learn and to really engage in this curriculum that I think, especially as I've started working with CEOs and people who are in the C-suite or executive suite, they don't have quite the same humility. So I think if we can get them early and get them used to this idea that failure is not only acceptable but also desirable as a learning opportunity, then the long-term impact on leadership culture is going to be massive.
I think we started this whole thing, all of us, in this world where it was all face-to-face. And then in the last year, this whole experience has been digitized. What are some observations you've had about that transition? Is it working? Is it not working? What is and what quite can't get there yet? I mean, I think that's a really, really fun conversation because I think there's a lot of rules in our head that it can't work. I don't necessarily believe that. I think it can. I don't know that we have the recipe yet, but what have you been seeing on that front, Megan?
The most important thing is attitude, right? The climate that you're building with your team. And so starting day one with, does this suck that we're all forced to be apart right now? Yeah, it's not great. We don't love it. But if we approach every day and every meeting with that negative attitude, then this becomes an energy suck. It becomes a negative experience in and of itself. So instead, making sure that we build time to joke with one another, to lift up our pets and show that what our pet is doing, just letting laughter be a part of it, letting joy be a part of it, which changes. It's a little more informal now, I think, than when we were in person. But I'm not mad at that. I think it allows for a sense of community when you're looking through a screen. So I think that's the first step that I've noticed between my group for CLC and other spaces that I've noticed, even some of the other classes I'm teaching. If you're not dedicating that time to still developing those relationships, everything else after it feels kind of stunted. So I think that's the key for me in my experience. But the other thing is really just making sure that you're still creating, Bruce talked about culture, right? And CLC really emphasizes a culture of feedback. I think that trying to make an established culture is even more essential, or a culture of feedback, is more essential in a virtual space because people can be muted, because you are able to turn your screen off and sort of have these reactions hidden, that if you don't set up the norms, like, okay, everyone has to have their cameras on or audio should be on to allow for more natural conversation. We have to build in a time to really talk about things that we might have not even spent time talking about in a in-person world. If you don't set that time aside for how are we doing, how can we improve on this, again, I think that you leave room for people to feel isolated, which is going to be the worst thing if you're trying to lead, right? That it requires relationship building. So making sure that you're setting up a foundation for leadership, for relationships is going to be, in my opinion, the baseline for success.
Yep. It's still all about relationships. It's all about that connectivity and having a space for that to occur. And then from there, we have them fail right off the bat.
Yes. Hey, that's a bonding thing, right? You don't bond quicker than when you fail together.
It's called shared adversity, right? You create it.
And I'm okay being the bad guy in that case. When they find out that I'm the one who just gets to decide that they fail, they are livid.
Yeah, there's a lot of literature and studies that show that sometimes bringing the group together to hate the leader is a way to bond them. Is really I've had a couple students in the past who were Navy SEALs, and I was watching a episode of their Hell Week. And this is more of an updated version recently, and the instructors were talking about how they're being more instructional about Hell Week instead of just completely trying to wash everybody out. They're giving them the why. And they're saying, you think we're just making this stuff up? We're not. This has all been planned and calculated. Everything we have you do is for a purpose and a reason to test you. And they're really coaching them through that week, certainly sorting out the weaker ones. And we very much do the same thing because there are some people who are willing to, who get it. Why are we doing this? And there's others who don't get it and they just want the normal college experience. I can tell you that being in the College of Engineering, our students sometimes, lack hubris and say, I'm already in the toughest major. I can't possibly do anything else. Well, actually, the people who are leaders actually get more stuff done than anybody else. They achieve academic excellence. They lead their student organizations, and they're a member of the leadership development program and probably have a side job on top of it all. And what they do is they become very disciplined with their time and their intentionality to learn leadership and what it's all about. And the more they learn about it, the more that they are committed to it. Now, going back, Scott, to what you originally asked with this transition, we're just about at our 1-year anniversary. Maybe next week might be the 1-year anniversary when we didn't come back from spring break. And it was almost, make a poor comparison to 9/11 or something. It was like, what? Is this really happening? We're really not coming back? Now, what do we do? It is very disoriented. And so I called together, my executive team and to have this conversation. We all know that leadership during good times is really hard, right? There's no opportunities. But leadership during bad times offers infinite opportunities. And so we said, well, what's the right thing to do? The right thing is to, suck it up and let's figure out how do we keep going. And most of the other student organizations just closed up shop, still have not reopened. And we have figured out perhaps many different ways to do things better online than in person. And so it has been a wonderful baptism in the deep end, if you will, of how to use a crisis and make the most out of it.
My students some of my senior students put on a seminar for their peers earlier this month, I think, and they identified what I thought was really a cool concept that in a time of tragedy, they use 9/11 actually as well. You see sustained behaviors, those things that are habits that will come back when the tragedy is over, that we still find ways to kind of engage in. Then behaviors that are transformed in some way, they'll never look the same. And then those ones that are sort of critical or collapsed behaviors, that will just never come back. And so they started looking at, for leadership, what are the things that will come back no matter what? And I think that to the point we talked about earlier, this whole idea that relationships are essential, it looks a little different, but it stays the same. And then what behaviors are transforming and will stay different? One that I hope stays different is an appreciation for mistakes and accepting that we are all human. Failures happens again, but also that we're all bringing a lot of baggage to the table. Being able to talk about that, have that open, accept that, and then move forward from there. I hope that continues. I think that's been a really beautiful space that's been created. And then what are the things that are not going to come back for us as leaders?
Yeah.
And so having to work through that, I think, is going to be another challenge. But to your point, Bruce, about you have a lot of opportunities in challenging times, I think that's deciding what behaviors are collapsing and what are going to transform and sustain. I think that really is that opportunity to sort of get ahead and create a new kind of leadership.
Yeah. It's really been an interesting, as I reflect, and my wife and I were walking yesterday and we were talking about it, because on many fronts, it's been a really wonderful year for us. And on one end, I feel bad about that. And I know that that's been incredibly difficult for a number of people. And I feel privileged that we were in a position to have income to. So we were incredibly privileged in this space. The baseline needs were met. And it was also an opportunity for us to clarify what we want as a couple down the road. I mean, we spent October in Utah, kind of just were digital nomads for the month. Our kids were virtual, we were virtual. And so we said, hey, let's go to Utah and shelter in place there and go to Zion on the weekend and go to Bryce on the weekend and go to Death Valley on the weekend and, exist there versus Ohio. So all of a sudden I was like, wow, there's opportunity here. If I could digitize myself in the next 12 years, maybe I'll be in Portugal. Meghan and Bruce, you can meet me in Greece for 3 months and we'll teach leadership from there virtually. I don't know, but it's interesting because and so Bruce, I can identify with what you said, because whether it was the leadership competition and both of you were involved, thankfully, in some of the early conversations of, okay, how do we pivot? What does that look like? But there's opportunity in this. There's opportunity, and there's an opportunity to explore a different domain. Because if you said to me a year ago, can this be done online? I would have said, heck, no way. And I had a conceptual block about that. I don't know that I'm completely convinced at this point, but my mind has shifted for sure.
We've all shifted, and our students as well. And something that's really cool, it's another plug for the CLC, is it's shown us, because we've been teaching online classes for a while now, but I don't know that we've done them exceptionally well. So people kind of got used to, like, okay, so how do we transition classroom to online? Well, they did that, but the CLC, with it being experiential and activity based, raised the bar, or use your term, raise the heat for online learning. And it's shown us that there is a better way to do it. And in many ways, I feel like my students have gotten a little bit spoiled now that they've seen the great ways you can learn, and you can do dynamic breakout rooms and team collaborations and chats and online surveys. It's forcing me to be a better teacher in the regular classroom as well.
What's missing? What have you not found the recipe for yet? What are you, even though we have the mindset of we're going to make it work, and we have that mindset that the possibilities exist, what have you struggled with, each one of you, as you coach?
I think I still have a bit of a block, and I don't know if I feel like it's shared. Most people share this, and that I still look for tangible things to convey leadership. So some of the activities that we've done, and we've talked about this before as well, that when there's a tangible object in front of you, you feel more engaged in whatever the activity is, and even when it's stacking Oreos, right?
Yeah.
It's still something that is the focal point for what you're thinking about, for the challenge itself. When you lack that, and some of the activities have lacked a tangible component, you're just talking, discussing, or you're typing online, there are so many distractions that I find people unable to focus in the same direction. And that's not even to say they have Facebook open on another tab, or that I have my email open on another tab. I might only have the activity in front of me. That same degree of focus, I think, is not there, and I'm still trying to figure out how to get that back. And like I said, activities that do have an object, there's a difference. People are more, even though they're in different rooms in different cities, they're more focused over this shared object.
That's so interesting. And I think it was Lori from Christopher Newport said that same thing, that there's a tactile element to all of this, of focus and having, Pringles or Oreos or tennis balls. And I know that sounds crazy to many, many listeners who are focused in, but again, it's an experientially oriented organization. And when we're live, we have a lot of experiences and puzzles that these teams are working together and oftentimes it might be manipulating something or working together. But you're exactly right, Meghan. I'd never thought of it that way. How easy if we aren't, and I think we still could put that in front of them in an online simulation, or I think that also is a version of that, right? It's just a digital version. But if that object isn't there, it's easy to go elsewhere, right? Bruce, have you experienced that as well?
So a couple thoughts. In a bigger, broader, more macro scale, some criticisms that I've heard is, okay, well, you've taught leadership at the university, community service projects, maybe through their technical RSOs, robotics teams, et cetera. How does this translate to getting them to lead out in the real world, right? How does the Pringle Wringle translate to them stepping up into a workplace? Because this goes back to the social interdependency. They've all been through the same thing together. Yeah. You see, they're all bought in. But what's going to happen is that team of 5 is going to go to work for 5 different employers, and they're going to be thrown into a culture that's totally different. I've had graduates who said, "Oh my gosh, I went to work for company X. Are they ever upside down? No culture. It's awful." And they tried their influencing skills, and it just pushing a rope. How do we where's CLC 2.0 after graduation, right? To create a community, to be more influential, so that people will say their success stories and where did you learn this? You learned this in CLC, okay? Yeah. So that would be my first point would be let's take it another step down the road and really see how meaningful it is, right? It's not enough to lead at the university. They have to be leading in their careers. That's where the rubber really meets the road. The other challenge, and this isn't on you, Scott, at all, but it's, as we said earlier, everything happens through relationships. And when, just like this podcast right now, we're meeting with a specific intentionality and a goal of completing a 60-minute podcast, right? We're not really sharing and caring all that much like we would at a conference over a beer or dinner or whatever, right? And so our students they've actually become somewhat more protective of their time because they spend so much time online. They don't really want to visit more online. And so we're missing that relationship building that just can't be done unless it's in person.
Meghan, same thing?
Yeah, I've actually had students talk about it's the 5 minutes before and after a meeting in person where you find out that so-and-so is watching the same movie as you, or they say, hey, I'm going to walk to Starbucks. Do you want to come with? And where you really develop a relationship outside of the task and start to trust one another on a deeper level. That has been really difficult to establish. But again, I think that we have to be better. It feels kind of silly and goofy, but building that in some way, however that's going to look, I think is going to be important. The other thing that you said that resonated with me, Bruce, about what's the relationship between a Pringles Wringle and work, I think it all comes down to the debrief. That's my favorite part of coaching. It's where I spend most of my time thinking about, like, what questions can I ask? Again, how can I build a space for them to think about these things? And with any kind of experiential learning, I think the value is derived from the debrief because you say, like, here you are doing this activity that doesn't feel like leadership. So we almost get to see what your leadership looks like when you're not thinking about it, which is your default in the workspace, right? And if they make that connection, then they really start to see why this matters. And so I think we can still build that in, and we can, to your point, really make it clear how this connects to the next step and the value that an activity like CLC can really bring to a university or a student or a community.
That's perfect. And you're absolutely right in the value of the debrief. When we went to the D teams exercise last week, we were 15 minutes into it. And then we Olivia and I entered in the chat box, remember this is about D teams. You guys jumped into the project already. Like, oh yes, that's right. And they've made that mistake practically on every exercise we've done this semester. And it came back to bite them once again. But we learned the most through our failures, and they're coming back and going, you know what? Every time we get lost is because we didn't follow the process.
Yep. Well, and I always love it's almost my version of a Mr. Miyagi moment, because to your point about, and we'll put some notes in the show notes for listeners about the Pringles Wringle, or we did one this year called Oreo. I can't even say it, but it was interesting with people all over the world literally trying to accomplish this. But it's interesting, once a good faction of them, yes, they're like, well, what did that have to do with anything? I don't get it. And you say, okay, what were some of the stressors present in that activity? Oh, rapid change when everything fell. Tough working conditions because I'm piling Oreos on top of each other and it should be simple and it's not. And all of that. So, okay, what followership styles did we see? Oh, I guess I kind of gave up about halfway in. Yes. What leadership style did we see? None, because the leader forgot they were leading anything and they were just building a tower.
So, Scott, I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
Did you come up with all these acronyms yourself?
Yes. Yeah. But they were integrated from a number of different theories, right? So they were, if you look at the leadership acronym, it's an integration of Burns and Comavez and any number of other scholars that some of the big pieces, by no means is it all of them, or is it even there's probably some major pieces missing from that acronym. I just couldn't figure out how to make work, right? But yeah.
Well, kudos to you. It is so pedagogically appropriate for our students. They love learning these types of acronyms and learning in this fashion. And I don't know if you remember 2 years ago when we met in person last time. My students even developed a song to rehearse all the acronyms. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
we shared it with you guys. It was to Shania Twain.
Oh man, I feel like a woman.
Man,
okay.
I feel like yeah. So they go through all the acronyms to that in the background. Is amazing.
That reminds me of Dan Jenkins traveling to the first conference from Maine to Cleveland, the first one that he participated in. He was driving a van, and they had Post-it notes all over the windows of the van with all of the terms and concepts as they were trying to learn them. Yeah, and I do need to say, look, it's a group effort because again, the two of you were instrumental in helping us think through how we shift, how we move forward. People have been very, very instrumental in suggesting shifts to some of the acronyms, and former board members and current board members, we go over those and is this still relevant? So we added, diversity matters to teams because that's something that we didn't originally have in there, and it's critical. We added in the values for the organization and this last summer because that's critical. Leadership for what? As we close down today, maybe the two of you could share something that caught your eye recently, either something you're streaming, something you're reading, something you're listening to. What's caught your attention recently? What do you think? And it could be anything. It doesn't have to do with leadership. Megan, I know are you almost done with all of your coursework for the Ph.D? So you've been...
Oh yeah, I'm done with my coursework. I'm working on the dissertation at this point.
So maybe you're all consumed with that, but I have to imagine you're streaming something.
Oh, well, I'm not a big movie TV person. I'm very much a podcast person.
Nice.
So this is exciting to be on a podcast. Yeah, I've been listening a lot to Throughline and Good Ancestor podcast. You're Wrong About is another one. I love to learn what I know wrong. So You're Wrong About is fantastic. And then Adam Grant's Work Life, to have something relevant to my field as well. I really enjoy his work.
He's great. Awesome. And Bruce, how about you?
Yeah, I recently came across a really good book. I was listening to a podcast by who I can't remember, but it was the author. His name is Dan Sullivan. And his most recent book is called Who, Not How. And the crux of it is that all of us are trying to get somewhere in life. And we look at this very, very long path ahead of us and all these things that we need to do. Megan, you're on that path right now. All these things you feel like you have to learn. But we make a huge mistake. At times the things that are holding us back are the things that are not a strength of ours, we're not good at, and we don't want to do. And we make the mistake of not asking who is good at this? And how could they teach us how to do it, or how could they help us achieve it? And Scott, I'm sure in your journey to build a CLC, you have had immense help from people who knew how to do something, as opposed to you having to learn and do everything on your own. And it's really changing my way of thinking and being a lot less bashful of asking for help from people who actually love doing these things.
Yeah. Things that you have no interest in doing, but for some reason, that's the thing that fires them up.
Yeah. A great example is podcasting, right? I don't have any interest whatsoever in the technicalities of how to set up a microphone, headphones, hence our problems before this. But I love doing podcasts. And we transitioned our newsletter that we've had for 7 years now. We transitioned it this semester to a podcast.
Well, to the two of you, thank you very, very much for the work that you do. It's awesome. And thank you so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate it. And have an awesome, I think we have about 20 days until the actual maybe it's a little less than 20 days, April 10th. But thanks for being involved.
Thank you for all you do. Truly, truly believe in the system and the mission that you have created. We're bought in, and we believe and live every day to make the next generation of leaders who are going to change this world for the better. And you're an integral piece of that. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, you all.
See you later, guys. Bye.
Two wonderful individuals, Bruce and Meghan, who really helped shift and shape kind of what this organization has become over the last year and a month, and can't thank them enough for their time on the podcast. A couple practical wisdom tips. It comes back to, it's all about relationships, building relationships, taking that time, whether we are in person or over the internet. It's about relationships. And then Meghan had mentioned something that was very, very interesting to me about the tactile nature of the work that we're doing. And if we have something we are engaging in, it's more likely that we will be engaged. And of course, that makes sense when we are live, and that makes sense when we are online. But I think it's something that should not go unnoticed and that we have to keep top of mind. This again has been a part of our Collegiate Leadership Competition series this week. The global intergalactic competition is April 10th, and we'll have 33 teams from across North America, students from all over the world participating and going for the trophy. So stay tuned. We may just invite the winning team to come on and do some real-time reflections so you can hear about their experience and some of their observations, the good, the bad, and the ugly of developing teams online and leadership competitions. Take care, everybody. Be well. You have been listening to the Practical Wisdom for Leaders podcast. If you liked what you heard, please share it with others and let them know what we're up to. And one last quick reminder to click subscribe so you know when we publish new episodes. And of course, we'd love to hear your feedback. You can stay in touch with me by visiting www.scottjallen.net or any number of social media platforms. Be well, be safe, and make a difference wherever you are on this beautiful planet. And now, here's Kate's twin sister, Emily, with the outro.
You've been listening to Phronesis, Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.